supply and demand chain executive, and I will be your moderator for today's webinar titled Enhance Your Supply Chain Resilience, Unveiling the Secrets of Logistics Visibility with SAP and FourKites, where experts from SAP and FourKites will illuminate the path to greater transparency and seamless shipment tracking. So let's first quickly meet our panelists. First up is Nicole Fox, Executive of Intelligent Spend and Business Network for SAP. In this role, she coordinates market expansion strategies for the SAP Business Network for logistics portfolio, working closely with global and large-scale SAP customers to drive supply chain best practices, innovation, and trading partner collaboration across their operations. Prior to joining SAP, she held a number of senior supply chain and procurement roles at market-leading organizations in the food production and agricultural sector. We also have Fabrizio Brasca, Chief Strategy Officer at FourKites, where he drives industry-specific go-to-market strategies, thought leadership, and solution execution excellence, as well as expanding FourKites' partner ecosystem. Previously, he was Group Vice President of Solution Strategy at Blue Yonder, responsible for developing innovative strategies, strengthening executive-level relationships with key customers, and advising companies on best practices to become more profitable. Fab joined Blue Yonder as part of the i2 Technologies acquisition after spending more than 10 years serving in transportation-focused senior management positions. Just a reminder to our wonderful audience to submit your questions via the Q&A console on the screen at any time throughout our discussion. Just make sure you actually hit the submit button to make sure the question goes through. And don't forget to check out all of our wonderful downloadable assets on the main portal page. You'll see some case studies from SAP, a survey that we'd like you to take, some premium content pieces. You can register for our upcoming SCN Summit event and learn more about our Women in Supply Chain Forum. And so with that, Fab, Nicole, welcome to the program. This is so exciting.
Great.
Thanks for
Great to be here.
us.
Yeah, thanks.
Of course. So let's kind of just dive right in. Resilience, let's talk about that. It's being used a lot. Walk us through how you define it and what it means to have a resilient supply chain.
Yeah, I guess I'll start. Resiliency is about all about absorbing impact, by definition. And when as applied to supply chains, if you think about what's been going on, not just in recent times, but even take a look in the past decade, we've got the notion of disruptions becoming now commonplace. So we certainly are familiar with a lot of these, what we call black swan events, hurricanes. We went through COVID, blockages, Suez Canal blockage. All of these things happen that we think are point in time and don't happen often. Well, these seems to be happening more frequently. I mean, I just lived through myself the wildfires up here in my native Canada just caused a tremendous amount of disruption. But if you add to that the competitive and technological disruption that we see continually or accelerating, companies are faced with just an enormous amount of challenges that they have to be able to absorb and deal with. So it's just elevating the importance of why organizations need to be able to absorb these changes and challenges in order to better serve their customers.
Yeah, and I just like to add, I think if nothing else, what we've learned the past, few years is that expect the unexpected, and that resiliency piece of being able to absorb. We can't predict, no one predicted COVID, right? We can't predict what the challenge is going to be that comes next that we're faced with. So resiliency is key in really, tackling that head on.
So a lot of questions that we get from readers is, kind of where you start. I don't have a resilient supply chain now. I don't even know where to start, what to do. Kind of, from your standpoint, how can companies achieve this? What is a good starting point for some of these folks and attending the webinar today?
I would say
go ahead.
Sorry, Fab, I'll go real quick. I would say from my perspective, what we always want to start with is what are your biggest challenges, right? And defining some of these things that might have different definitions across the board. Like we talk about visibility. Well, what does that mean to you? What does it mean to your customer? What are you trying to achieve? What's your biggest pain point? So I think really doing that self-assessment of what are your biggest hurdles that you need to tackle, and then how can someone like SAP and FourKites help you get there?
Yeah, I would add there a couple of perspectives. One is certainly there's the macro things where, when you're thinking about these black swan events and how to remap your supply chain to be able to absorb them more efficiently or more effectively. The big thing is a lot of these supply chains are designed to be hyper efficient. Tend to be simple, very cost minimization focused, and the reality is when these things occur, those supply chains tend to be easy to break. And so factoring in things like at the macro level, like the dispersion of risk across your supply chain so that if something, a particular node breaks, you have the ability to spread movement across all other nodes. That's a great example of a macro thing that you need to be able to change. But I think there's another perspective, which is, organizations, I think, need to be constantly thinking about future growth and future enablement, and especially with the confluence or the advancement of technology today, that's really teeing up a lot of opportunities for companies to think ahead and how they can become not just resilient but actually agile. And to Nicole's point, I think understanding what are the end drivers that you want to be able to achieve, whether it's focusing on, the customer centricity and how you're going to better serve them, or other key metrics you want to drive, bringing those together and crafting out a maturity plan is certainly the way to start those processes.
So if a supply chain agility and adaptability are the keys to resilience, and logistics visibility is key to agility, what exactly is logistics visibility?
Yeah, first and foremost, it starts with gathering, the data, right? And that's one of the things that's kind of exciting in the world of technology that Nicole and I live in is, we've seen so much advancement, and there's a lot of things that, we probably, we take for granted today that just weren't available 10, 15 years ago. One of them is just the availability of data, how much data is available. And so, you combine that with, the advent and availability of cloud computing, and then bringing together things like ML and AI together, it really creates a lot of opportunities to do some interesting things. So visibility starts with just the fact that we can see things happening in the network, and start to break apart silos within an organization and start to make better decisions.
Yeah, and I would say having that visibility, prior to these advancements, a lot of times delivery dates, for instance, were just kind of a shot in the dark. You would cross your fingers and hope that what you were promised would come to fruition. And it was only until something didn't show up that you knew you had a problem, right? So then, as you can imagine, the impact that has on your production run that you have scheduled, or your customer order that you promised that would be out by the end of the week. We didn't have that data available to get to this point in time, right? So I think things have really come a long way, and now being able to see or have that visibility and leverage it to have less of an impact or make better operational decisions to lessen the impact, lessen your customer dissatisfaction, whatever the case may be, whatever you're trying to achieve, that data is critical to achieving that.
Yeah, and I would add, one of the things that's really important when we throw out this term visibility is, while we say the data is readily available or abundant today, it is hard to gather, right? Mm-hmm. To aggregate, to put together, right? There's so much of it, and there's so many participants in the kind of the network that, that's where, organizations like SAP and FourKites really add a tremendous amount of value, even in that first initial layer of being able to bring data and participants together to do interesting things. And then you start to layer on the additional technology and being able to make, predictive and prescriptive decisions from them. Then that gets really, really exciting. But the gathering of the data to begin with and the generation of insights, it's tough stuff to do.
Yep. And if you think about it, right, when you're talking about these partners that you're working with, I think it makes perfect sense, right? If you're maintaining one-on-one relationships with them, getting that data, getting it in the same format, getting it in the same place, right, aggregating it you can imagine the web that creates and how complex it can be. So I think that what Fab said is critical, that the data is available, but getting it aggregated, getting it, we'll call it nice and pretty in one centralized location is the challenge. And that's where SAP and FourKites can help on this journey.
So in talking about visibility specifically, how does it work? Kind of walk us through what that looks like and what it takes to achieve that full end-to-end visibility.
Well, at FourKites, it started with where we started as an organization, and what our kind of original core competency is all around transport visibility. And it starts with connecting to the carriers. Carriers don't necessarily have, the most advanced technology necessarily, depending on what mode or geography you're dealing with. There was certainly a kind of a groundbreaking moment in the United States when there was the electronic logging mandate. So all of a sudden you had vehicles that had to have, technology within them that allowed companies to come in and be able to gather that data and bring it together. But even then, that's a non-trivial task, because there's just thousands of carriers out there, and you can gather data from the large ones, but getting participation from a lot of the smaller ones, or the long end of the tail, as we say, it is always a challenge. So you're always trying to find easier ways to get those carriers on board and bring those things together. So it always started with transport data, and then being able to expand across modes. Of course, ocean and air and rail and all those things. But then you start to bring that together with other aspects of data and information to be able to start to make predictive decisions, or predictive things like predictive ETAs, whether it be historical transit times, or what's going on with the weather, or what's happening, other aspects of the supply chain. That's where you start to bring all those things together and drive that correlation. As I said earlier, not an easy thing to do, which is why that this type of partnership becomes significantly valuable.
Yeah, and I think bringing that data together, as you mentioned, and seeing the weather impact and the granular detail of, okay, so there's a weather impact, but which of my orders does that affect, right? I can't go out and manually figure all this out on my own, and being able to visually see that. And then I think what's super important is not only do those updated delivery dates based on whether it's just a standard shipping delay or a weather impact, whatever the case may be, that date can go back and update your SAP backend. And then all the subsequent processes that follow are now based on the most accurate, up-to-date information possible. So your execution then at that point is based off of this data, because you were able to get that update based on one of those factors that we talk about. And then your planning in your back end is better. Your availability to your customer data is better. So it's a trickle down effect. And I think it's more critical than just what it seems at face value. And I think sometimes we say, like, okay, I can see where my stuff is. So what, right? So what? I know it's stuck in the canal. What do I do about it? Well, knowing the full picture of the impact is so incredibly important to a business and operational efficiency.
You raise a really good point. I think that's something important to stress for everyone that's participating or sitting and listening. We talk about visibility, and that's not just about the dots in the map or the availability of the data. It's about creation of those insights, and then how those insights get applied to these real world use cases, right? How that informs an organization's an ability to make decisions or pivot based on a disruption happening. I always like to use the analogy, I like to run, in my spare time. And, when I first started running, which was a long, long time ago, I used to drive the route in my parents' car, and then look at the clock in my kitchen when I started and stopped. And that was the essence of the data that I had. Nowadays with, sport watches, I know everything from my heart rate to, my training health and whether I'm fatigued or not. Just so much data is captured. And what that does is it produces insights for me, where I can start to make make better decisions and rest when I need to, or train a little harder when I need to. And so that's really important for organizations. Visibility is not the end of in itself. It's a foundational layer to inform and action other parts of the organization to behave and be more agile, as if we go back to that original theme.
And you bring up a good point, because there's a lot of companies that are still kind of operating under the mentality of, this is how we've been doing it for years, we're good, kind of a thing, without understanding that these tools and these technologies are available to kind of help them do their job better. And I think it's very rare that there's a full, digital supply chain out there. There's pieces of it that are digital, and then there's pieces that are still manual. So kind of what do you say to those companies that are, still operating a little bit not as modern as they probably should be?
Yeah, well, I think, I was gonna say, I think you nailed it, right? We do hear that often, we're good, we're getting by, right? But if I think back to my time I spent in inbound logistics and procurement, is when a disruption came up or a shipment was delayed, and the impact it could have on our production, it would take, I would say, sometimes 2-3 full-time resources to drop everything that they were doing and try to figure out how on earth were we going to get this part to the plant in time? Could we put it on an airplane? What could we do? What were our options? And sometimes there would be no option, and we just ended up spending countless hours trying to figure it out, right? Or we had a strategy to, let's kick up our safety stocks because we're not, things aren't as reliable as they used to. And that could have been at a component level, at a finished good level, at both. And all of that is at a cost, right? So I think, it's common that people say that, but I think until they fully see the benefits that a solution like this could have, and really free up the time to manage by exception when something comes in or something's delayed, having it right in front of you where you could do the risk analysis and figure out your best course of action without taking your best guess or flipping the coin or hoping if we get it on the airplane it's even going to get here in time, is huge. So I would say we hear it, we get why they're saying that, but there's still things that they're doing on the back end, I think, that are costly, maybe even more costly to them than they realize. And that solutions like this could really help with efficiencies and, money savings. The list goes on. It's so we try to help show the full capabilities and really what a day in the life could look like if you had this, and what that impact could be, not only to yourself as an organization, but to your customers, and so on and so forth, even your carriers, the benefits it has to them as well.
Right. I'll add here, we kicked off this with talking about, disruptions and black swan events. And a lot of times when you talk about visibility, people like to frame it in those terms, right? We talk about resiliency and the ability for organizations to absorb these dramatic events. But what I mentioned earlier at the beginning was, those aren't the only types of disruptions, right? There's also things like, change in consumer behavior. We lived through a transformation in the past 10 years or so, where there was a significant pivot to customer centricity, right? Thinking about individual consumers rather than just markets. And the ever increasing expectation of individual consumers and how organizations needed to be able to deal with that, right? You add to that, competitive disruption, right? We talk about the Amazon effect and, how organizations need to be able to deal with these encroaching business models. And so there's always a reason why, or I was going to say, the better way to say it is, there's an ever increasing reason why organizations can't stay stagnant. Mm-hmm. The world's just moving way too fast. And if you think about your behavior as a consumer, you buy something online now, there's an expectation that, even if you're going to get it late, you're okay as long as you know in advance, right? You get that alert. That's a level of customer service. Well, now apply that to your whole supply chain, right? Where every node within the chain has that level of customer expectancy. And it raises the importance now for organizations to have a handle on their supply chain and understand what's going on at every level. So, and that's where these technologies become absolutely foundational to do that.
Yeah, and I would just one more thing to wrap up, because you brought up the we're good with what we're doing, we don't need that, right? And I think a good question back is like, well, you're good now, but what about in a month or 6 months if something unpredictable happens? Then at that point it's almost too little, too late, right? You're scrambling. You can't, as fast as implementing cloud technology is, you can't do it with the snap of a finger. So how much is that going to cost you to not have the solutions in place to be able to react to whatever comes your way? And it's way more costly than the notion of we're good because we either don't want to change our people or our processes or whatever the case may be, the driving factor behind that comment. There's a lot more benefit than
right.
Pro to staying with how things are just because things are fine, because my ... is for now.
Yeah, that's a great point, Nicole. Think of the major brand named organizations that have come and gone in our lifetime because they thought they were okay.
Mm-hmm.
And we're not talking about small businesses. We're talking about major global corporations that grew to prominence, or maybe they were around a long time, but they suffered because of a technology shift or a market shift, or they just couldn't keep ahead of changes in their external environment. So if it can happen to them, right, it can happen to anybody. And that's where they're really keeping pace with these changes and these advancements becomes critical for any organization.
And I think the misconception also is that companies feel that, well, I've track and trace features, I can trace things, but tracking a shipment or a package is not the same thing as visibility. What is kind of your take on that?
I think you touched on it earlier too, right? It's like you could track it, right? You could probably click the FedEx link or see where something is, but bringing it, I think Fab touched on it, bringing it all together into one place. You're not looking at these things individually or on a one-off basis, and not only bringing it together, but having those real-time updates that can feed back, or having that layer on top where you could take it a step further, look at predictive analytics, exception detection across your shipments. It's not just enough, like I think we said earlier, like, where's my stuff? I know where it is. It's not about the dots on the map, or if Fab's going for a run, where he took a water break. It's about, that entire end-to-end process and the impact that it has. It's not just knowing where something is. That's not going to get you the full benefit or allow you to be as resilient or agile as you can be with solutions like what we're talking about today.
Yeah, and one thing I'll call out here, and it's funny, it's interesting timing because we just released a whole bunch of new capabilities and innovations around our ocean visibility. And I raise that because a lot of times people use it, they think real time and they think about active, GPS pinging and the trucks on the road. But the further up your supply chain that you can have visibility and predictability, the more power you have in actually enacting and driving change and being resilient. So, it's one thing if the truck is on my way to location. It's good to have that predictive ETA to know whether it's going to be late, and particularly if it's an inbound move into a facility, maybe I can, I've got to rejig my labor or reschedule my docks. That's great. But understanding whether an ocean container is going to be a week or 2 weeks late, that has tremendous impact. Yeah. And we've been so used to focusing on last mile and consumer sentiment that I think, and it's interesting, I think this change during COVID, it really shone a light on the importance of upstream efficiency and upstream challenges, where if we saw a couple of cases where there was a port blockage or a port a hub closure, that could impact an entire downstream supply chain. And so the earlier you can get that visibility and predictability, the more impact you can have.
Yeah, and I think that the earlier you know it, to Fab's point, sometimes if something's already in transit, there's not much you could do potentially about those goods that are, stuck wherever they may be. But the sooner you know it, if you have a secondary source of supply or you happen to have some at another location, you can start putting those plans into motion. Whereas, just kind of sitting there in the dark, crossing your fingers, saying a prayer, hoping that things don't go downhill. So it's critical to be able to operate most efficiently and have the plan B, C, D, E, however many, backup plans you may have, being able to have them ready and to execute on them before it's too little, too late.
And I think what's important about that is there's still a lot of companies who do operate a little bit in the dark in certain aspects of their business. And while they may have traceability factors in place, they're still really, not up to par with that. We can talk about digital transformation and kind of what that means for those moving product in the dark. Kind of what do you tell those folks on the importance of digital transformation and why moving that way is important for their business?
I think, the thing to talk about there is, again, it goes back to being stagnant and kind of being satisfied with status quo. That might be okay for now, but as we've seen, dynamics change, markets change, disruptions happen. These things are just unavoidable. And what's really interesting is it seems to be happening at a faster rate. So I think that's the one nuance. I don't know if we captured fully at the beginning. Everything seems to be happening more frequently or at a faster pace. Certainly technology is changing, that continues to accelerate. But even, these disruptions that we thought about, happening once a year, seem to be happening more frequently. And so it's more and more pressure from organizations to pivot and be able to engage. It doesn't mean you have to solve your digital transformation overnight. These things take time and there's levels of maturity, but you have to start that journey and start to map that out. If you ignore entirely and just look at things, piecemeal, you're going to be very challenged.
Yeah, I would say that that's key, right? A digital transformation is a huge undertaking, but you can start small. You can start with some digestible chunks and build as you go. What's the most pressing critical issue you want to solve for, and then come up with that digital transformation journey that's aligned with your goals and initiatives and what pains you need to solve for or what benefits you need to achieve, and then plan it out in a way that makes sense. It doesn't mean you have to transform your entire supply chain overnight, because obviously that's right. A very daunting, probably scary task for people who are operating in the dark. But if you can do it in a way where you achieve benefits and you keep adding onto that, keep layering on additional functionality and technology capabilities, whether it's starting with a certain mode of transport and then expanding that, whatever the case may be, it is a journey. And I think, as Fab said, starting it is the most important, because if you don't start it because it's too big or too scary, then it's only going to get bigger because you're going to be a little bit left behind, right? So starting is key. Doing it in a manner that makes sense to your business and your goals and what you're trying to achieve, I think, is the key to success in that regard.
So for our audience, if you have questions, don't forget to submit them in the Q&A portal. You can do that at any time. Just wanted to remind you. So what are you hearing from your customers that you're working with? Kind of what is next? What is the rest of the year going into 2024 look like in terms of trends and what to expect?
So I can start that. So, the big thing in that we're working with our customers on, and certainly this has become a prevailing question. I'm sure many of our audience have the same one around, the value of visibility and what end states can they drive. And so one of our focus areas has been working with customers to really focus on that, and this is always a tough word for me to say, operationalization of the visibility, right? We've been talking about that, and that's got to be the important theme here is, visibility in and of itself is certainly valuable, but the real value is how do you take that and drive these interesting use cases, right? Breaking down silos across the organization, and really leveraging that predictive information and insights across the your entire supply chain continuum. So a lot of our work, and I'm sure Nicole will echo this as well, is really focused on helping customers absorb and operationalize these capabilities. Because honestly, if you look at, we talk about digitization and digitizing supply chains and supply chain transformations, and all these things look great on slides, but they're really hard. And especially with how many pieces of technology that are coming out, it seems like there's a new one constantly appearing in the marketplace. It gets confusing. So really focusing on those end states, I think Nicole said it well earlier, making sure you understand what problems you're looking to solve and what end results you're looking to drive, and then working backwards from there. That's certainly the focus for us and with our customers. Nicole, I'll pass it over to you.
I would say the same, just making sure that, they're aligned internally and what they're trying to solve, and understanding, again, it's not just about, one set of data. Supply chains can be extremely complex, and you might have, great data or insights in one area, but not the other. So bringing it all together and helping them see the value that they could achieve, not just by having an accurate ETA, but knowing the impact, analyzing, their carrier performance based on these events that keep happening, and then making decisions, better business decisions based off of those insights, right? So trying to better that for the future, being able to have that data to drive that analysis and decision making, really just opening the doors or their eyes, I'll say, to all of this data that is hard to get or aggregate, as we mentioned, but being able to actually leverage it for the better and make huge strides in these areas where they have been operating in the dark, or they've been operating in a way that they get an update, but that update doesn't go any further than a notification, right? So I think, as Fab mentioned, I think we're both, focusing on that value that we can bring to the customer. The trends, or what they're saying, is typically, the same thing. They just don't have that visibility. They're making up for their lack of visibility in other ways, as I touched on before, whether that's safety stock, or, they're getting chewed out by their customers because they keep promising them something and they keep having to go back and tell them, hey, sorry, I said 2 days, but I really meant, a week. And I think Fab touched on it better, right? We might not be able to fully eliminate a delay to your customer, but when you tell them a week out, hey, it's going to be, 2 more days. Is that okay with you? And they can make, changes on their end to make that okay. But when they don't know until it doesn't show up, or you're calling them, an hour before your delivery slot, that starts to impact, how they view you as a supplier, or what the service level that you're providing to them. So it's really just, we're not going to solve world peace, right? But we can bring all of that to light and give you the tools and the data to make the best decisions for yourself, your customers, your carriers, and truly everyone ends up operating more efficiently, which is a benefit to all parties involved. So
yeah, let me add something to that. So if you think about consumer sentiment and how the expectations that all of us have now when we engage, particularly online, with an online retailer, like, we expect to know, we expect to get those updates. And more that is going up the supply chain, right? Those expectations are going beyond individual consumer sentiment. And as the technology becomes more pervasive, right, expectations are rising across all nodes of the supply chain. And it really adds back to the point we were making before, where organizations really can't afford to be stagnant because the expectations are rising, right? There's a minimum bar now that, everyone's going to expect to understand, not just when things are going to happen, but, some prediction on whether things are going to be delayed or early or any deviation, because it is becoming more and more pervasive. So it's really something to think about. And we're seeing, I'm seeing certainly a lot of these types of, things that we get accustomed to or take for granted in our consumer lives becoming important in the enterprise space. And while I'm on the topic, I'll pivot a little bit there. Even from a technology standpoint, think about how we interact with our phones and the app ecosystems that we deal with. Right, there's a lot of aspects of that we now find ubiquitous. Right, common sign-on. Ease of integration, multiple apps working together seamlessly. That's becoming more and more important for the enterprise. And this is a great example where, going back to your question, Marina, about, what else are we working on? That ubiquitousness of integration and seamlessness and joining various components of the supply chain that were previously siloed, that's becoming more and more important. And as that continues to get driven, the expectations will continue to rise for all the participants in the supply chain. So, the fact that someone's operating in transport or warehouse or supply chain planning, the walls between those, previous silos, those are all breaking down.
And I think that's a good segue to get to questions from the audience, because a couple of them kind of have to deal with what you just talked about with your cell phone example. So we're going to switch to Q&A from the audience. And for those who still have not submitted your questions, even if they're suggestions, comments, just points that you want to make, go ahead and please submit those now in the Q&A portal. So referring back to your cell phone example, a question came through. I have to go to each of my carriers' websites to track shipments individually. How can I get all of that brought into one place?
Yeah, I mean, that's essentially what we do as a platform. Is we bring all those connections. We create those connections for you, bring them into a common platform, and not just in this case you're talking about maybe someone may be talking about truckload carriers, but we do that across modes and bring that into a common platform, and then link have the ability to link all those things together. Right, because it's not just enough to know that a particular truck is going to be late, but if we're looking at the journey of goods. So, if something is coming in, for example, from the Far East and is going across multiple modes, right? It's coming across on the, ocean carrier, and then it's hitting the dray carrier, and then it's going for local distribution, right? We want all those things linked together so that as delays happen, we can continue to propagate a predictive ETA to the end destination. So that is essentially what we do as a platform.
So here's a question, and as somebody who shops online a lot myself, this is a very question that's near and dear to my heart. I find out about a late delivery after it misses the planned arrival time. I've asked the carrier to reach to me in advance, but that never happens. How can I find out about delays before delivery time is missed?
Nicole, do you want to take a stab at this, or I guess I could take this one.
No, so it is a question very near and dear to my heart as well, avid online shopper. But that delivery the status is updated, right? So you could set within the business network alerts to say this didn't, meet the estimated, time spot, whatever the case may be, and be notified via whatever settings you've set up for those alerts before, you're standing outside your front door, seeing if, the driver's pulling up and dropping it off, whatever the case may be. So you can be alerted prior to that happening. And obviously in the context of business, you can obviously have that alert then go down to, the dock appointment, notify someone in operations to say this shipment is no longer coming today. We need to reschedule that, and they can execute that on their end. So gaining that, not just the update to the user who's waiting for the goods, but to the person who has to unload the goods or receive them into the warehouse, whatever the case may be.
Yeah, and let me add two more things there. One is about, that's one of the cool things about I talked about the technology innovation, right? Where, um, in addition to getting, aggregating the data from the carriers and getting those pings, we're applying a lot of external factors to that to understand and come up with a predictive ETA. So it's not just about where a truck is now or where an ocean vessel is now, but it's where they're going to be based on all these external factors. And that's where technology's gotten really, exciting with the ability to, to do, big computations and bring a lot of external data together and applying, machine learning to those things. We can come up with these pretty incredible predictive ETA models to do that pre-alerting, if you will. But the second part that a lot of people overlook is then taking the historical analysis on why things were late and what happened within the supply chain and starting to apply that to a lot of the models that exist in execution systems. So for example, a TMS is often very reliant on transit time definitions. And so having the historical data and being able to capture that and updating those transit times with maybe more realistic representations on a particular lane or time frame or mode allows the models now to be more accurate even from an execution perspective, so that those expectations on when something are going to arrive are now much more up to date and accurate and realistic.
So what will be the 3 top benefits, according to you, on business process?
I would say first and foremost, it's hard to pick 3, but one could be, your improve responsiveness to any issues, which obviously have a operational efficiency gains and so on and so forth. If you think about knowing when something's going to be delayed, you're going to be expediting product less, right? Fewer rush charges. You're putting things on trucks or planes to get it there the next day. And in turn, your customer service levels are going to go up because you can rely on the dates that you think product's going to come in, or you can rely on the date that the product's supposed to get to them based off the most up-to-date information. I would say those are really the top ones, right? I think there's a lot, but don't underestimate the value of having all of this data connected, the situational awareness that you gain, connecting the physical flow with the related information, and being able to detect those bottlenecks and make assessments on the carriers, and in hindsight, looking at the carrier performance and making business decisions based off of that. So that I would say would be the top, I don't know, maybe I listed 5, not 3, but benefits for having a solution like SAP Business Network for Logistics and FourKites for that visibility component.
Yeah, I mean, that was really well said. I think there's certainly some, very tactical benefits that can be driven. We talk a lot about, dealing with detention charges and demurrage charges and, reduction of OTIF fines, on time and full fines. Those are all very practical things. But back, to Nicole's point, I think, having this visibility foundation allows your entire supply chain, particularly the technology ecosystem, to just operate at a much different level. And what that ultimately will lead to is, again, this has been, a challenge. If you think about supply chain in general, since the creation of MRP plans back in the day, it's all about trying to reduce inventory. And because that's a company's first reaction to any disruption or challenge is to increase buffer stock in across the nodal network. And so the more you can apply the technology, particularly across silos, to be more reactive and to be, to be able to be more resilient to these dynamics, allows you to bring those buffers down in more confidently and effectively. And ultimately, that's where the value can really be driven. And then tie that to, of course, the customer satisfaction component. which we can never ignore, right? Again, expectations across the board, whether they're enterprise customers or direct consumers, has elevated. So being able to marry those two things together those are huge value drivers for an organization.
And one final question before we wrap up: is SAP Transportation Management required to implement FourKites?
No. That's a very straight answer.
No.
There we have it.
It's not. Transportation management is not required for the visibility component of SAP Business Network, which leverages visibility data from FourKites. So no, plus that.
And a lot of the other comments, I think we're trying to imply earlier as well, is a lot of times visibility is often, the default is to think about it from a transportation perspective. And, we need to get out of that, or organizations need to get out of that mindset, right? The level of data and the information that we can bring to bear can be used across the entire supply chain continuum. And that's where I was getting to around, us helping organizations operationalize visibility, because it's going to get them at thinking out of just the basics of, okay, knowing where my truck is can help me solve transportation problems. But what about, inventory problems, supply problems? There's all sorts of things that we can tackle, leveraging a better, a grander view of visibility across the ecosystem.
Wonderful. Well, thank you to our wonderful audience for joining us today. Don't forget to take the survey that is outlined on your portal, as well as all of the downloadable assets that you can download and save to your computer. And thank you to our wonderful panelists for today with all of your great insight. An archived version of today's presentation will be posted at foodlogistics.com and sdcexec.com, or you can access the on-demand version from your registration link. That's the link you used to log into today's session. Again, my name is Marina Mayer, Editor-in-Chief of Food Logistics and Supply and Demand Chain Executive, and I hope to see you at a future webinar.